Jonathan Martin, Director of Inward Investment and Higher Education Academic Relationships at Waltham Forest. I've been there since September 2015 and thoroughly enjoyed my time, been through a number of roles, even in that one department.
From Ackroyd Lowry, I'm Oliver Lowry.
And I'm John Ackroyd.
And this is Urban Forecast, the show where we talk to the people defining the future of our cities. We discuss their background, what drives them, and the insights they've learned along the way.
This is a podcast for anyone who's interested in how we live, work or play in the cities of the future and what that means for the built environment today.
So, Jonathan, thank you so much for coming into the studio today and for being on the podcast. We've obviously met several times on your magnificent bus tour that you do around Waltham Forest, as well as many events and some really interesting meetings about opportunities that we're working on in the borough. But I wondered if you would like to start explaining how you got into the role that you're in at the moment, what led you into doing this incredible role.
Yes, a really interesting point to reflect on because of my journey. So I've been recently meeting a number of quantity surveyors, and that's how I started in the whole industry. I started as a trainee quantity surveyor a little while ago, and then from there became an assistant quantity surveyor, a quantity surveyor, qualified through the RICS process by getting a degree. So I've got a degree in surveying, got full RICS membership, and then a number of opportunities came forward that changed that quantity surveying focus. And the biggest significant change was I was working for an organisation called English Partnerships. And one of the directors there, so you've got a lot of quantity surveying expertise, but you also get involved in a lot broader work within that department.
What did English Partnerships do then?
So English Partnerships were I suppose you call them a quango, but they're also a non-NDPB, non-departmental public body, and they essentially were buying, selling and developing government-owned land. So we had a massive corporate estate, and it's still going in terms of Homes England.
Okay, so that's what they sort of transferred.
That's what Homes England eventually became. Yes, they've still got a lot of that land portfolio and lots of skills around acquisition, purchase, developing, selling sites, and also doing joint ventures. So I was in at the outset of that, and the particular board director said it would be really good if you thought about expanding your role through a number of opportunities that were coming up, which I didn't see myself doing because I didn't see myself in those roles, and decided to go for it, got the role, and essentially then that opened up that wider real estate opportunity, which I really liked. Far less streamed as just one sector. From that, I then got opportunities to work in Milton Keynes, which was fantastic, different part of the country from London.
And what role were you doing there? Similar.
So again, it was a very similar iteration of the kind of English Partnerships role, and it was all around land development. So my role was land manager, but within that, I had a portfolio of about 800 and something hectares of land. 825 hectares of land across the southeast, the wider southeast, so pretty much from Peterborough all the way down to Crawley, because it also picked up some of the legacy from the Commission for New Towns. So there used to be 21 new towns, and at that time we were working largely focused on those areas. So
so were you bringing in sort of private developers to partner with the sort of the land ownership then, or was it just done purely by the council?
It depended where you were, and we worked alongside the council. So we weren't the council in other parts of the country. In Milton Keynes, essentially the Commission for New Towns and English Partnership had planning powers, 7.1 and 7.2 planning powers. So they could grant planning on sites, which was really good because essentially we could control what came forward. So we would bring in third-party developers to build on sites that they would buy of us. So we were thoroughly engaged in that, and then walk through the planning with them as well. So it was a kind of a virtuous circle of cradle to grave as a design concept, went pretty much from designing it, giving the planning, then seeing the thing get done.
And was that, were they typically house builders, kind of Barratt, Berkeley types, or were they more smaller, local?
It was, again, a really good mix of house builders, industrialists, so that's a Prologis, were there building industrial estates. There were lots of mixed-use development as well in terms of commercial floor space alongside with offices, but alongside housing coming forward. So that was a big focus on how we were looking to, for example, build up Milton Keynes at the time.
And what was it that started to appeal to you at that point that was drawing you away from the quantity surveying? Was it that you really enjoyed this kind of partnering, or was it you enjoyed this big sort of strategic role versus the micro. And I think sometimes QSing is quite, you have to look at everything quite close up, don't you? What was the thing that was drawing you in that direction?
It's a great ground in terms of understanding the technical side of how you deliver schemes and cost consultancy and so forth. So enormous respect for that industry and that sector. What drew me into that wider, broader focus was really around the sort of partnership working. I love working with people. I also liked being able to see a scheme from an earlier concept stage as well, which was really important for me. So with QSing, you might get to be involved once you've got to a certain part of the development process. When you get into that wider is where you are upstream looking at the early designs, I could be involved in that as well and go all the way through to delivery on site. Post
you're probably getting in even earlier than us, really, because kind of identifying parts of the land that are going to be able to be brought forward. That's the bit I think actually we as architects kind of almost miss out on, and it's part of the reason that I think we quite enjoy working with boroughs like yourselves that have got quite an open attitude towards saying that this is the direction that we want to go in. And actually, I do think do a great job of bringing people in on a sort of vision stage of a project before it's even drawn. It's like, this is the aspiration, the vision for the borough, and bringing people into that, into rooms where you can talk about that, I think is really fascinating for us, because we actually get to see almost a bit before we're involved.
That's a really core part of what we deliver at Waltham Forest, and what's certainly drawn me to that borough is that early engagement, the endorsement we've got from the leadership and senior management all the way throughout my time there as part of Invest Waltham Forest. And that role and that particular engagement with people at the outset to start to talk about the whole proof of concept, the scoping, that initial feasibility work is interesting because you can see how you can shape things. You remember where it starts and then how it may sort of transition. And that's, again, really enthusing because you know you're making a difference when you're talking to people.
So if I take you back to Milton Keynes, sorry, I jumped ahead. How long were you there, and were you then headhunted out of into Waltham Forest?
I was at Milton Keynes for about 4.5 years. I thoroughly enjoyed my time there, saw the place change before the theatre district came along, before the Snowdome, as it was called at the time, and all the major sort of development was still in the offing and in the pipeline. So I was helping that come forward with bringing developers and investors. And then an opportunity came up in London to get back down to London with English Partnership working for the South East team. And that effectively picked up parts of London and East London, which I was really quite enthused to get involved with again. Thoroughly enjoyed my time there, ended up working at Harbour Exchange as part of English Partnerships. And again, there was lots of work we were doing with developers, investors, contractors to bring forward schemes, more sort of East London and South East London focused. So that was really quite important. And also working out towards part of the sort of South East and North of Kent. So North Kent and South East of Essex, which was part of my role as well. So that was a really interesting kind of reflection between what some boroughs were doing outside of London, with London as a major focus, because that's where a lot of their kind of linkages were, and how we were doing that in Eastern.
What were are there any sort of major kind of landmark projects from that period of time that you now go back to and go, this came from my inception?
Yeah, I was really pleased. I was discussing this just last night at an event where we were really pleased to be involved in some work in Basildon. And one of the schemes was about how we could bring forward a change in some of the retail that was there. And so I was really pleased with that scheme in terms of how we had a freehold ownership. We were able to work with the incoming retailer and negotiate a position where we could essentially get them into that ownership through a transaction and a sale. And we had to operate, and this is what I really was enthused about this particular project, at such pace. We had to do a deal pretty much from seeing the transaction to getting the deal done in about 4 months. And that includes all the governance, all the risk mitigation, all the governance papers and the approvals, and then actually doing the transaction. So I remember the board director at the time saying it shows that we can keep pace with the commercial sector. And I think that's something I've always kept as one of those kind of guiding principles, which is you've got to react swiftly and make sure that the kind of industrial sector, the commercial sector, the residential sector see you as able to operate at the same speed. Because that's where the money comes in terms of the cost of money. They can be doing something else with it. We'd rather than do it with us if we're talking about Waltham Forest. So that was really quite instrumental in shaping my thoughts on how I engage with the private sector. And I've been fortunate to work with great colleagues that largely have had that kind of approach as well. So as you'll know from working with Waltham Forest, you generally get people pushing all in the same direction to get to that overall end result.
You've got the dream team there with the team that they've assembled at Waltham Forest. I think most boroughs would be very envious of that sort of senior level of officers and politicians. What are we now at the point where you migrate to Waltham Forest? Was that through the English Partnership still?
So from English Partnerships, I then left and went to Croydon and spent about 3 years at Croydon. So that was really enjoyable as well, just in terms of getting back into sort of local authority. And that was the real first time I got into understanding in a contemporary context, the machinations of working in local authority, the accountability, the
pace. Did you suddenly find everything went a bit slower?
It was certainly more challenging in terms of the governance and the accountability that you have to have. So you've got to go through a transparent approach to why you're doing something, how you're bringing people along as well. So far more around the consultation, which was really important, obviously, going forward. So that was quite an interesting stint for me. And then I got the phone call.
I'm going to stop you there because I really want to ask, given the troubles that Croydon have had over the past couple of years, obviously, first of all, not 60 bricks. What's that one called?
Brick by brick.
Brick by brick. Sorry, 60 bricks is Waltham Forest. That's fine. That obviously got into trouble and had to be bought out. And then I think the administration itself effectively ran out of money. Was there, I don't know, maybe you won't be able to say, but were there signs in the kind of governance or the way it was being run at the time when you were there, maybe over ambition, trying to emulate the private sector? Were there signs that you were reading that when you saw that happen subsequently, you went, yeah, that kind of makes sense?
Not when I was there, because I left just as the sort of political leadership had changed. So things were still being shaped and crafted in terms of what the new administration wanted to do. And I was in the regeneration department completing existing schemes or going forward with existing schemes. So I was then at the point that I was asked to come and talk to Waltham Forest and go through the sort of rigorous hiring process that they have there. And so when I joined, there was still no inclination that anything was going to happen at Croydon. So I'd still be in contact with my old colleagues, and it was all, it's changing because people are taking opportunities, but I wasn't cited on any of what's obviously come forward since then.
It was a real shame because actually I think that what they were doing at Brick by Brick, they assembled really great design teams, they were ambitious, and they were doing, I think, what Be First and 60 Bricks are doing now pretty effectively, which is delivering a return to the local authority and delivering homes for people that live in the borough. It's a real shame that one went so badly wrong, and I don't know enough about why, but I think this new arm's length developer aligned to the borough, using the borough's borrowing facilities effectively and their ability to borrow cheaply, is a really great way to deliver housing in it, because at the moment it's a lot of private developers are finding it very challenging to deliver homes, and actually they need local authorities to be assisting them where they can. It's a shame that it didn't work out so well in Croydon.
And again, perfect example of, I wasn't at Croydon when Brick by Brick was set up, so that all came along after I'd already left the council. So I was looking on with interest in terms of that's a new way to deliver housing, it's a new vehicle that the council's supporting, and then watched it from that kind of, I used to be involved in that council. So again, similar to yourself, it's just sad to see the way that things transpired, but it was past my tenureship there. I've been observing it pretty much as everyone else has, really, in terms of what's transpired since then.
And then, first, so did Stuart Murray, were you interviewing him, or did he come after you?
So Stuart joined after myself. I've had the really interesting pleasure of going through what was a rigorous interview process.
And who were you interviewing with then? Was it the...
So eventually I was, and it's funny enough, I was interviewed by who is now the deputy leader, Councillor Hassan Khan. So he was on my interview panel, pretty much like this. And that was the final interview I had, And obviously now I'm working for Councillor Khan. He's the deputy leader looking at housing and regeneration. So
great.
So that's a fantastic full circle. You think, you don't have that happen often in your life. I've really warmed to the opportunity to do that, and he's come along to a number of our investment events. We did an investment summit back in November last year, and it's our third since obviously the pandemic kicked in, and we've been really enthused at the sort of leadership engagement with that. So our leader, Councillor Williams, was also there, Stuart Murray was there, Martin Easton's been there in the past as well. So we've had all of that mandate from the top leadership and the political leadership to endorse Invest Waltham Forest and inward investment. So that gives me a lot of confidence and mandate to engage with the sector.
I think it's worth explaining, actually, because I brought some people along to that event, and it would just be worth explaining what those series of events are, because as far as I know, they are pretty unique to Waltham Forest. And I think everybody that I've ever brought, I've been to loads of them, everyone I've always brought has been just so impressed at how they're like, this borough is different to every other borough, because look at what they're doing. They've got everybody there, all the senior decision makers in planning and regeneration are all there saying, please come to us, understand what we need, and then help us deliver it. And I haven't seen it in other, I think Croydon actually did used to do it, but they did a tour as well, but
Yes,
but I think you guys did it amazingly well. Do you just want to explain a bit about the thinking behind it and how those events work?
Yeah, sure. And again, it's a really interesting point just around how people horizon scan. So the leadership at the time, so this would have been about 2014, looked at the borough. We'd been through the Olympics, thought we could have got more from the Olympics. We got plenty, but we wanted more in terms of physical improvements to the borough. So they commissioned a growth commission. And that essentially was a number of learned people, including employers within Waltham Forest, to look at the borough completely, look at various areas in terms of housing, how we were promoting ourselves as a borough in London, and a whole raft of other things that we needed to do to address the borough's ambition. And that report was published and brought forward about 26 to 28 recommendations on how we could do better in the borough. One of those was standing out in London. And how do we make Waltham Forest far more visible, far more of a presence? And that led to Invest Waltham Forest. So the Cabinet at the time in 2014, 2015, but 2014 initially adopted the entire set of recommendations.
Oh, wow.
And said, let's get on with it.
Yeah.
And through Martin Easton's leadership, who's the CEO, there was a keen drive to make that happen. That's how we then started the focus around Invest Waltham Forest. I was then brought in 2015. We got the investor tours going.
Yeah.
And that was all about when we're speaking to people, what do they actually hear? So it's the old so what factor.
Yeah.
And everything I wanted to do was about the so what factor. So if I say something to an investor, there's a site coming up, so what? You could bid for it.
Yeah.
So how would I do that?
Yeah.
And it's always that answer.
Or I think even the ones that aren't within your ownership, it's not just how do we bid for assets that the borough owns, it's more, I think certainly, look, this is a site that we think can come forward.
Exactly, yeah.
We don't have control of it, but we know that this is an area where we want redevelopment, and therefore come talk to us if it's something that you're interested in bringing forward yourself. And I think that's, from the first time that I did the bus tour to now, there's 20-story buildings that weren't there, like Black Horse Road.
Honestly, it's a testament to that drive and ambition to get prosperity and growth through development. And I think picking up on that point, it's all around how we can bring people to understand where the landowners are. So that investor tour was always around, here are the growth areas, here are the areas that we're looking to focus on. And whether we own the site or a third party landowner owned the site or an intermediary, the general sort of push was, this is potentially going to bring forward some much needed development, and there's going to be expectations around quality, obviously. And as you said, through those kind of various investor tours, bus tours, and also the briefings, I think people get that kind of understanding that we mean what we say, which is we want to support investors and developers.
Yeah, and that's all developers want. I think I've said this many times on this podcast and used Waltham Forest as an example of all developers really want is certainty. All investors want is certainty.
Exactly.
And there's lots of factors that are well outside of your hands that create uncertainty at the moment, inflation, etc. But the one thing that you can control is the planning process and the ability to try and work with people. And I think what makes it easier for developers is that you're very clear about what the vision is. So I think if you come to Waltham Forest and you get it wrong, then more for you, because it's pretty clear what you guys want.
And it's a really good observation, and we are looking to always articulate and improve it and make it as straightforward as possible. We're doing lots around design, which is obviously very apt for our discussion, particularly around how we can do exemplar design and benchmark what we want. There's a whole piece around developer performance agreements now, and that actually expands out the engagement of planning to much earlier in the process and much later in the process. So it's a much bigger intervention by us working with designers rather than just a PPA. So again, that's getting the message out there. I've been out to site visits with investors, looking at sites, walking around those sites with those investors, and with my colleagues from regen, property, planning, housing, and we will tell that story of what we think can come forward.
Yeah.
And we may not own that site, but we know that they'll be coming back to talk to the council. Yeah. So it really helps in that kind of single point conversation, that single conversation where sometimes you get a phone call and we've got this interest, but we don't know who to speak to in the council. And we can triage that into the various.
I would just get everyone to speak to you.
It helps because, again, I can make sure it's an efficient introduction to the borough.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can then make sure the other person on the other end of that.
But yeah, also you're the conduit to the the relevant person, which I think is very handy. And it's nice that not every borough has a Jonathan Martin that you go to first, and he understands your need, and then tells you you can speak to Ian Ray or whoever it happens to be.
Thank you. We do get positive feedback. It's all about that initial impact. And again, what's been really telling about that is, in my role in terms of being innovative and trying to change the borough for the better in terms of prosperity, is always horizon scanning in terms of what's next. And that's why I've got the second half of my title in terms of higher education, academic relationships, because it's due to my introducing the University of Portsmouth into the borough. So that was something, again, through a conversation at an event. And from that, there was a big discussion around, is there going to be a proof of concept here? And then we went into all sorts of very rigorous Treasury standard Green Book appraisal type work to establish if a university could be established there.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, coming back to my earlier points, was around relationship building. So working with people, but also picking up on your point, Ollie, around what we've always said, which is certainty. So you know that the leader's going to be there. So really interesting story, but again, it's less than a year ago, actually. So I got a text on a Saturday. So I was looking at my work phone on a Saturday, but I got a text from a colleague working for the university partnership. And he said, our chairman is flying in to the UK en route to Canada. And he'd like to see the top brass. And I said, okay, that's really good. That's good. So we'll have a whole partnership thing. When do you want that? And he said, Thursday. So I said, Thursday, which month? And he said, Thursday, as in the Thursday coming. So I was really, as you can imagine, taken back by, this is going to involve all of the senior leadership and the political leadership in terms of attending that meeting. And I thought, can't say no to that.
Yeah. So it better not be bullshit.
Yeah. So it's like, right, how can we make this happen? Just go for it. And that Thursday, we were all sitting in the room. And I was sitting in the room, looking down the table, thinking our leaders here, deputy leader, Stuart Murray, student director, Heather Flinders. I was there. From their side, it was deputy vice chancellor, group deputy, and another vice chancellor, their chief executive, their strategic global director, and their chairman in 3 working days. And I just stopped and looked and I thought, wow, that's going to give you a sense of, this is really serious to the borough.
Yeah.
We take this stuff really seriously.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, diaries had to be shifted and moved to make that happen. But it happened. And we then did a tour of the borough in terms of walking up to Waltham so Central, just to show them some of the sort of landscape of where the actual university would be potentially located. And it's just occurred, that was less than a year ago.
And then fast forward to now.
Fast forward to now.
Scaffolding's down on that big tower, which I believe they're at the base of, is that right?
Yes, so they're going to be in the ground floor and the first floor of Juniper House, and they are targeting opening that university. We've gone live with the website. We've gone live with the actual announcement last week that the Admissions and Recruitment Centre, which is based out of our central library, is available for people to start to use in terms of the courses.
Yeah.
And it's going to be about outreach and raising awareness. And they'll start teaching next year. So January 2024, from a cold start in March 2020, just as lockdown kicked in, and the project was stood up with a team in January 2021.
So that application must have already been consented, is that right? So there was just a commercial space at the ground floor that you went, that's where you could fit.
So interestingly, there was an existing application that had been consented by the previous owners.
Yeah.
And that was for quite a large building going on that site, in terms of Central House, which is the main location for the campus site. And Juniper House, we were obviously building that ourselves, and that had obviously gone through planning and was on site.
Yeah.
So that was going to work out in terms of, we were just acting in a very nimble way.
Yeah, so you could easily slot them in because you're in control.
Ground floor commercial, university, that's going to be a really good anchor tenant for that particular location, and potentially a partnership spanning out for 50 years. Why wouldn't you do that? And then Central House, we sold to them, and again went through all the sort of due diligence, the commercial sector, the negotiations, and again that's now going to go through the whole planning process as well, which will take forward through the wider DPAs I mentioned to you.
Yeah.
Again, targeting opening that building by about 2027 in terms of the new campus. Teens tall in terms of the actual impact of building, up to 5,000 students. And again, it's just off the pace of what we expect as a borough. And you get that from the leadership going
Yeah.
right the way throughout the offices, basically.
And because I think, you're very lucky with the leaders that you've had. Was there, so obviously Claire stood down, and did that interrupt in any way the sort of momentum that you had? I know Claire was she was, I suppose, part of the vision really of bringing in so many high quality people to deliver for the borough. Was there any sort of loss of momentum with Grace, or did she just pick it up on a running start?
It's a really interesting point, because it's one of those things where you start to think what's going to happen next. But just to give you some brief context, so Councillor Chris Robbins, no longer with us, unfortunately, so rest in peace, was visionary working with Martin Eaton around how we could do investment in Forest. And at that stage, they were really pressing that forward to start that journey. Then Claire used to be the portfolio lead member for the economic growth team, and then became the leader, working closely with Councillor Chris Robbins. And then obviously, as you said, Claire stepped down, and obviously Councillor Williams came in, and she's been a breath of fresh air in terms of how we do the engagement in a far more articulate way.
Yeah.
So explaining the benefits of growth, explaining prosperity. So
to the residents of the back, because obviously actually a lot of what you've been doing is to explain it to investors, and it's her approach that you need to also bring the borough, the residents with you as well.
it's a better articulation of how we explain why we're doing what we're doing with our residents. So there's a lot more co-creation. There's a lot more around the ground up approach in terms of what's good for those communities and those locations. We do the big conversation, and we hold those annually, where we listen to what they have to say. So there's that kind of real mandate to understand what people want in the borough and where they want it and what we can do about that. And then the sort of feedback we then bring into how we approach some of these growth areas and locations. So from Chris to Claire to Grace has been seamless in terms of that embracing growth. And that's been something that you wouldn't expect to see. As if you had to worry about risk, one of the biggest risks is, the leader's going to change.
Yeah, exactly.
We've not had any of that impact, anything we've been doing in terms of our sort of growth agenda and prosperity agenda. And that's something that I think is, again, really comforting when you're talking to developers. I'm saying, well, where do you sit now on development? It's like, well, actually,
look at what happens in Wandsworth, or in Southwark, even where the change of leadership really did change the outlook if you're a developer looking to work in that borough. And I think that is a big risk. Particularly at Wandsworth as an example.
And I think because it's been seen as a risk, we're looking at how we can mitigate risk for our development sector. And that's one of them, in terms of consistent leadership, but also the certainty, and also making sure that whole message is continually promoted to the sector.
And I think actually also you've really got, I suppose, what Waltham Forest have done is that you split off. It's not directly, you don't go to Councillor Williams, you go to Stuart Murray, and that's a department in and of itself. Whereas I think at Wandsworth, Rav, you used to be somebody that would really be quite involved in some of the developments coming forwards. And I think actually, if you split it out like you've done, then a change of leadership doesn't necessarily affect that team, because it's such a strong team that you've got with Justin, Stuart, yourself.
I've been really blessed with working with fantastic colleagues. So the other thing about what I do in terms of investment and promoting the borough is you give it all this to sometimes strangers who don't know you. And you can back it up. So they might think he's giving it all this. But actually, when they then come and see the borough and they meet some of my colleagues, they're like, wow, okay, this is a really serious borough. And then the real decision is around how they engage in terms with my colleagues. And that's why I'm pleased to say they get that consistent professionalism and that can-do attitude on how we can bring stuff forward. So that for me makes it a far easier position to talk to, as I did last night, an international bank about potentially looking at funding potential schemes coming forward in Waltham Forest, with the certainty that I know when they come and see me next month or later this month, I'll have the team ready to say, look, this is what we've done on our own land, but also working in partnership with others to give that sort of track record and that credibility of choice to the partner as well. So
I think the town hall is a great exemplar. I remember when I lived in Waltham Forest, so slightly biased, but I remember first going to Waltham Forest, and the town hall it looked like something out of the sort of communist era of like Italian fascism. It was very grand, but it was also behind these massive gates. And I remember cycling past it for the first time and going, I wonder what that is. I remember cycling past the council and looking at it and thinking it looked slightly terrifying and certainly very unwelcoming. Whereas when you go there now, I think the fountain you put there is amazing. When you go into the building, it's fantastic. That plus the Borough of Culture, were they like 2014, they were set as strategic goals as part of that idea that you needed to bring attention to what you were doing in the borough?
So again, a really quick question just around what was the sort of genesis of those fantastic end results. Borough of Culture wasn't set from 2014. That was something that came along through obviously the Mayor's office. And the changes around the town hall, very similar. It's all been agile, looking at what the needs are of the local community. What's been really quite important about the Borough of Culture though, and being London's first Borough of Culture, was the endorsement it gave of how we've engaged with our communities. We had between 14 and 16,000 volunteer supporters for our bid, which I think was the largest of the boroughs that actually took part in that competition. And I think there were about 20 of the boroughs that had gone for that first Borough of Culture programme. So we were pleased to get it in 2019. It then really led to knowing our communities so much better, the network of networks. We worked with a number of partnerships around understanding how you get that sort of ground up approach to culture. We had our own bidding processes where local communities could bid for themselves in terms of cultural ideas that could be promoted, and they'd be peer reviewed. And if they were successful, then they'd then get funding to support those events. Over 1,000 events, every school touched by Borough of Culture. We had hero events as well that came along. And it was just transformational in terms of what the borough has been about for a long time in terms of that cultural offer. But leading into the sort of changes, we then saw that we could take that further forward. Again, as we got was MJ's Local Authority of the Year in 2019 as well. So we were setting a really high bar there. And I think that gave us the confidence to look at what could we do with the town hall. Yeah. And transformed it into what you say and have seen it is now. For us as staff working in it, it's amazing when you're sitting there, the windows are open, you can hear the music outside, you can hear children playing, adults talking, and that hustle and bustle of people enjoying themselves in that fellowship square. Yeah. So it's really transformed what was a really austere, you better have a really good reason to go through those gates to go to the town hall, whereas now there are signs saying this is your space, come in, and you'll get people, particularly moving into the spring and summer, using that space for all sorts of things. Loads of events are going on there as well, so that's been really transformational. And as a sort of staff member seeing it, you just think, look at the sort of vision you have to look at it isn't fixed in this particular form. You can change it, and it can be more engaging. And we're doing a similar thing down at Coronation Square in Leighton. So that's a scheme that's being brought forward through Taylor Wimpey, and we'll similarly have a square.
Oh, next to Leighton Orient.
That's it. Yeah. So again, it's going to be a transformational urban extension down in Leighton, and it's how we can build off those lessons learned. So we are literally, if you go to, for example, our housing zone, and look at the earlier phases of the housing zone to the later phases of the housing zone, you can see the changes and the improvements and the lessons learned in terms of the built form and how we are doing things in terms of making sure we don't lose those experiences as we improve with people living there and using their spaces. So it's been just eye-opening. And again, that happened during the pandemic. We kept stuff going because we had to make sure we could protect jobs, but give that marker to the industry. We mean what we say. We're going to keep building. We're going to keep building.
Nice also to come back. I think a lot of offices have struggled to actually get staff back in. So we did all this work to this office during COVID as well. And actually nice, fantastic. Once it's finished, getting people back in and going, look, it's better now. And it's a bit of a draw if you can have a nice space for people to work in to actually get them to come back into work. So is it working well? Have you got high occupancy rates of your staff, or is it still split work from home?
Yeah, we're still using a hybrid approach. So it's about 2 or 3 days a week expected in the office. Being very flexible about that flexible working. And again, it's got to do with the exigencies of the service. So if you're frontline staff, you've got to be in because you're meeting the public on a regular basis. If you're doing other roles, then there may be a bit more flexibility about it. What we're really keen to support, though, is that sort of collaborative feel to any of our sort of teams. So we have different neighbourhoods, as we badge them, within Fellowship Square Town Hall. And within those neighbourhoods, you've got different teams. No particular desks are ruled out for anyone, so you can sit anywhere you want. But there is that neighbourhood that may be focused around regeneration. There may be that around planning. There may be that around housing, 60 bricks and so forth. So yeah, I think from that kind of focus, the reflection has been, how do you improve? And really quite telling, given what we've just been through as a planner, how do you reflect on the personal journey? How do people feel about going into Fellowship Square? What's the experience as a staff member, as a user? How can we open that up to the community? So there are horrible spaces there as well. We're doing lots of civic things there. People are getting married there. And we're looking at how we can also improve some of the other buildings and assets around it. So the assembly halls will come back into its full use. And that's obviously a big cultural asset for us. Big push, obviously, from the borough culture in terms of making sure we can evidence our cultural legacy. Soho Theatre, which is being built at the moment through, again, the change from EMD Cinema. And we'll be soft launching that later this year with the hard launch next year. And that's going to form part of our cultural centre, that cultural quarter for us. So we're really excited about that. And that will sit beside our university quarter, and that will sit beside the work that's going on over at Fellowship Square with the work around the new community that's going to go.
There's a lot of work on that building site to get done this year. Every time I go past it, I'm like, it says coming 2023, and I think, hurry up then.
We'll get there. We'll get there. It's a soft launch and then a hard launch, but again,
no,
it's
the
willingness of partners.
It looks like it's made some big steps forward.
Now the hoardings come down, you can start to see that facade as well. It's really wow. And you've got Soho Theatre as the operator, so you've got a quality operator that's going to really drive that for us and secure the acts that we want to bring into the borough and make the borough a pull. That's the other thing that when you mentioned what brought you to the borough. When I used to be there in the early part of my tenure there, people would say, oh, we ended up here because we were pushed out of elsewhere. And I said, we've got to change that narrative and start to pull people in. And I think we're there more now in terms of people don't just talk about us as that's an overflow to somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's actually, that's a really good place to be.
Yeah.
Because people are sensible, you've got clear lines of what you can achieve, and you can see existing people that are there as advocates will say, we came here, we set up business. It's been very straightforward. If we've had issues, it's been dealt with, and we've had to then work together to get those end results we all want.
Yeah, I think that comes across. So I've got two final questions.
Yeah.
The first one is, what's next? I think you must be coming, for you personally and also for the borough, you must be coming through almost up to the 10-year plan of, if it started in 2014, this is coming up to 2024. Is there what happens after the end of that kind of 10-year plan? And then the same for you personally, is there another challenge in a borough where your work here is done, so you move on, or are you going to stick with Waltham Forest? You probably don't have to answer.
Yeah, interesting question. I'll think about the second question, but I'll certainly give you a take on the first question, because we've had a number of sort of corporate documents, our corporate strategies, over that period. So the 2014 document wasn't necessarily spanning it over a 10-year period. It was more of, you need to look at these particular pillars of improvement. And within that, you get to your 26 or 28 recommendations. But over that time, we had a number of corporate strategies. And we're now entering our next iteration of corporate strategy, which is all around how we can support people to meet their maximum potential, how we can do a big piece around jobs, helping people back into jobs, safe and healthy lives, and how we can make sure we bring people along in terms of that co-creation of ours. That's massively important for us. So it's a big thing around everyone being involved in the sort of future of the borough. We're going through our local plan processes that takes us up to about 2036, 2037. And lots of targets in there around making sure we can deliver the homes and the jobs, which is really key. Big focus around the sort of jobs, climate emergency. We've got a 2030 challenge to get to net zero carbon. And again, that was through our sort of climate emergency that we declared a few years ago now. And it's just around what else can we do to really move the borough into an area of prosperity. One of the big things we've looked at is the whole issue around health inequality, which is noticeable across the borough. And so we've used the Marmot Institute, Professor Marmot, has come in, looked at what the borough's been doing, looked at where it can go, looked at what some of our interventions may be, and we're working through that now to see how we can really make a difference to our most vulnerable, but also the wider population as well. So that's quite challenging.
Yeah, and you want to be building a new hospital at Whips Cross as well.
And obviously we're looking at Whips and how we can bring that forward, a major anchor institution for us. So we're an anchor institution, they're an anchor institution, and obviously University of Portsmouth is an incoming anchor institution. Yeah. So to get 3 anchor institutions in one borough looking to transform at the same time has got to be a one-off. So it's really infusing to be in that discussion. Yeah. So in terms of what's next for us, it's around how can we start to future-proof the roles for the potential jobs that are coming forward for our residents. And a lot of that has been on the back of finding out that we had about 45% risk of our residents being at risk of losing jobs or changing jobs through automation. So how can we address that? University coming in with what they'll bring in terms of research and development, and so what knowledge transfer will have a big part of that. We've got jobs academies, as well as you can imagine, Ollie, that's responding to the impact of the pandemic. And there's also that middle tier of people partway through their careers, maybe a bit older in terms of their career path that could potentially transfer. So how can we work with them to give them more job opportunities. So from the council side, that's really quite big. From the sort of my professional side, it's always about growth. So what's next? I'm looking at how we can use university as a catalyst to deliver some more things that I'll share in the coming months, no doubt. And it's around, again, changing the ambition. And that's a big thing where a few years ago, people may have thought you'd never get a university here because you haven't got one. There are other universities literally just over the border in other boroughs. And now we've got one.
Yeah.
And it's how we can really use that to leverage,
Yeah.
not just raising our expectations for our residents, but raising their expectations and how they can fit into the wider offer for London as well, and really position the borough to be a real anchor as part of that kind of upper Lee Valley. So it's really significant, and the sky's the limit, basically. So it keeps me enthused and keeps me thinking.
Good politicians' answer about your future. But no, I think it's perfect time to wrap it up. And just thank you so much. It's been great working with you, and thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Ollie. I really appreciate it.
If you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe and give us a review, ideally a 5-star one. And if you want to know more, please go to ackroydlowry.com or follow us on Twitter @ackroydlowry and Instagram with the same. This podcast supports Land Aid, the property industry charity that brings together the sector to deliver life-changing projects for young people who really need it. Visit www.landaid.org to find out how you can help end youth homelessness.